join the call, and I think we'll get started momentarily. Expecting a couple more. Can you mute us there for a second, Krista? Oh. Hi, folks. Thanks again. We're going to go ahead and get started. Welcome to the first meeting of OPCA's Data Warehouse Governance Committee. I appreciate you all prioritizing the meeting today, and hoping we have a few folks continue to join us. Let's go get started. Krista, do you want to move through? So let's start with some introductions. Again, this is Laura Sisolak with OPCA, and with me in the room are
Krista Collins, Director of Data and Quality, Therese Cook, Project Coordinator,
Craig Hostetler, Bill Munoz, Superintendent Garcia, Troy Carpenter, OPCA Healthcare Metrics Analyst.
And on the phone, if you could announce yourself.
This is William with Rogue Community Health.
Fine.
This is Blaine with Neighborhood Health Center.
Diane from the Yakima Valley Farmworkers Clinic.
And Jeremy Wood from Central City Concern.
And Michael from Mosaic Medical.
Anybody else who might be on mute thinking they're introducing themselves? Okay, thanks for that. Today we have a couple of hours. I don't know if we'll need the full time, although I suspect we might. We have a lot that we're trying to dig into today. So we'll spend just a few minutes, probably the first 20 minutes to half an hour, talking just a brief overview of our data strategic plan and the Health Center Controlled Network grant, to kind of level us all with where we are in our process and remind us of what our recommendations are and sort of the recommendation for this work group in particular. We've developed a very drafty charter to kind of walk through, which I think is just really intended to focus us on goals of the work of this committee. We'll talk then, I know folks are curious and interested about committee composition. We'll talk about a number of things within the conversation on charter. And then we identified a couple of kind of key sort of first priorities for us to begin discussing. One is the accountability plan. Hopefully not to confuse those of you on APCM. This is for Ochinakure. I think a first order of business we talked about was coming up with a plan to hold Ochinakure accountable to some outcomes. We'll talk a little bit about moving forward with some demonstrations of alternative products. And as you'll see, when we review the recommendations, we talked about engaging some consulting assistance. And so I'll just talk a little bit about what I think we'd recommend as priorities for that position and see what kind of input or thoughts you have there. So are there any questions or thoughts about the agenda to begin with? Okay, great. Let's move on. So just as a reminder, and I think, you know, I had anticipated, and there might be a couple of folks who weren't necessarily involved in our meeting on November 17th this past year, where we reviewed final recommendations and had a conversation. So I just wanted to level everyone with what exactly was reviewed and approved on that date. So many of you were directly involved, or other members of your clinic were involved in our planning process, which really began in August and extended all the way through November, facilitated by Roger Chauffinier. And you'll recall that we had a pretty aggressive schedule of webinars and meetings to discuss and react to proposals for an OPCA, really data warehouse strategic plan. And that's the basis of which recommendations were made to the full membership in November, and that those members participating in that conversation approved adoption of that plan, and concurrently recommended that the board give consideration to a budget proposal that would be aligned with sort of standing up key components of that data strategic plan. So I didn't bring that here today. The board will be considering that next Friday. Is that right, Craig?
Well, the board will be, talking about a pricing structure that connects to that strategic plan.
Mm-hmm. So that'll be considered next week, and I didn't really bring the details of that to this meeting today, although if folks, you know, would have questions or want to think through that, you know, need a refresher on what was included within that budget plan, I'm happy to share that with you offline or send it out to everyone after. So once the group of members, the number of you present for, approved of that strategic plan, and the budget plan advancing to the board, we moved ahead with inviting interested folks here to this committee. A number of you who, you know, we've asked to sort of continue on from our planning process throughout the summer, and to sort of form kind of a preliminary committee. And I know I talked to some folks, and one of the things we'll discuss shortly is around this committee composition, decision-making process, and authority. And I think we want to think a little bit more thoroughly about who should be at the table, who we might be missing, are there other people who should be involved? But it's a bit of a chicken and an egg conundrum in that we sort of, you know, ask for volunteers and ask for folks who had been involved with us all along to kind of kick this off and get us going. And today we'll have a conversation about whether we need additional folks to participate.
And will you kind of go over, is there different committees, right? I mean, because there's the committee that OCHIN has ongoing to help oversee a Cure, and I think there was some, I think an extension of, you know, an invitation for people to participate in that, but that's separate and that's got a different focus than this committee, which is on the governance side and kind of overseeing how the overall strategy, right, for the data warehouse is developing and shaping up.
Exactly right, Gil. And we'll touch on that momentarily, and you know, think in a similar way about who should be included within that committee as well. And then we've continued to have, I think we, this was referenced at different points during our planning process over the summer and fall, that OPCA staff at a leadership level have been meeting with OCHIN periodically. Just Monday, we had a full day retreat to talk about both this plan and sort of level setting around Accuray and where they are, and to discuss some of how we'll be working together moving forward to address that accountability around Accuray. So we've continued to meet with them. Any other questions about sort of our process to date here before we start? I'll go back over, as I said, the main contents of that strategic plan.
Laura, this is William.
Hi, William.
I just had a question. Hello. I just had a question about timeline. Has that been thought, have you guys been thinking about that as well as to just, what we would expect to occur on the timeline we would maybe think about that occurring?
Yeah, so I think we'll touch on that when we get to the charter and we start looking through it. And Krista and I, again, just for your reaction, and also in our conversations with Ocean Accuray, sort of framed out kind of short-term priorities, which we defined as the first quarter of this year. What are we getting off the ground right away? And then additional priorities through the rest of the year. And we can, adjust and revisit that, but we'll talk about it when we address the charter.
Great.
Was there someone else who had a question? Okay.
This is Diane. I would just say part of this is also in parallel. I see demonstrations on the first slide, so that we're in parallel looking at other products as well. And again, you might get to that in the charter.
Yep.
Okay, yeah, perfect. Thank you.
And discuss where we think that should fall in terms of the timeline and how quickly we move through that process. So.
All right, thank you.
Okay, so here again for your reminder were the final recommendations that were approved this past November. The first, of course, being to formalize a standing committee of OPCA for data governance. We need to be, and this is my bad discipline about how we're naming these because there are so many committees. I think we actually are referring to this as the Data Warehouse Governance Committee, which is this collection of people today, our meeting today. Second, you may recall, or for some of you, your eyes may have glazed over when reviewing a very detailed document that Roger helped us to create that outlines data warehouse specifications, highly technical, and the recommendation, of course, is that we need to continue to maintain and update those specifications and needs for OPCA's data warehouse for use in future planning. The recommendation was to adopt the strategic plan, execute it, and maintain it as a working tool. Fourth, to advance a political strategy, working with OCHA, OPCA, Care Org, and others on getting access to total cost of care data, and really agnostic of whatever tools we're using, that getting access to that data is something that we'll need to seek, I think, soon, and probably with a variety of strategies. That we would adopt the Accuray system of accountability and continue to assess performance and comfort level with that tool. And we'll walk through that a little bit more today when we talk about accountability. This was sort of the first draft. There were process aspects of this accountability, which includes that sort of committee structure that Gil asked about and referenced. And then what we also, I think, need to move to quickly is what kinds of metrics and milestones we want to see outlined, and what are reasonable timelines and things like that. Part of this plan was to optimize the HCCM grant and the Accuray product in the near term as our data warehouse solution. So again, our meeting on Monday and work to maximize the tool as it is now is our first approach to our data warehouse. And lastly, that this committee continues to technology surveillance in the sense of being aware of what else is going on in the environment, integrating other considerations, health information exchange, what's going on at the CCO level around data warehousing, and that we essentially keep an eye to that broader environment and integrate that into our thinking.
Pre-manage
exactly, all of those things. So let me pause about these recommendations. I'm hoping these are pretty familiar to folks.
They'll even past the holidays.
Good.
I recall that.
I'm glad to hear that. Okay. This really, I'm not going to go through this in a ton of detail because, again, I think this is, you folks have seen this several times. I think it's just really a different way that Roger framed those recommendations. And so sort of thinking in terms of buckets of work, how we're influencing the environment to gain access, that's the recommendation, obviously, around getting access to total cost of care data and the like, optimizing our current relationship. The data ecosystem, I think, really integrates that both maintaining our specifications and our needs for a data warehouse, as well as that sort of external view to what else is going on in the environment around the state with respect to other HIT issues. In thinking about investing in our own internal, by that I mean OPCA, data management analytic capacity of OPCA and member health centers. So how are we thinking about and helping to prepare you all for the internal capacity that you need to maximize the use of a data warehouse and the tools that we're sort of working collectively on. I think this would also cover what is OPCA doing with data that we have access to. And I think in the long run, obviously, agreements about data use, privacy concerns, sort of data sharing agreements and the like would be captured here. And I suppose that's also related to vigilance and data governance, and so I'm sort of conflating those two. What we do with the data, how we protect it, and what our agreements are with one another around them. Other questions here, things that might be missing? Okay.
On the point of fostering a learning community on population management, I think that's a really important point, is that, you know, we're learning a lot as a group of health centers around how to look at and utilize total cost of care data, but always looking outside also, and seeing how other areas of the country are utilizing this kind of data to help improve population health and things, so that, you know, it can also provide us with guidance on how we want to shape, you know, the direction of the data warehouse.
That's a great point, Jill. And this is, you know, it looks so simple written right there, a learning community on population management, but you folks are aware, because many of you are involved in the variety of sort of work groups and efforts we have around this. We do a lot of this work through APCM, our data transparency work group, and then for those of you who are organ contractors and OCHIN and Meaningful Use, you know, there's a number of efforts kind of in this space around learning about that population management and data use. And so I think it's our goal over time to try to integrate those as effectively as we can, so they're not duplicative, not to be duplicating or adding another layer of this. So just that point. And looking to best practices to do so, because I'm sure we're not the only ones with that kind of complicated environment. Are there any questions about this last page before we move on? Okay. Okay, so this is to revisit what I think Gil had asked about before, and that this is a part of what OCHIN had helped to outline as a recommended accountability structure is how I would describe it, defining how OPCA and OCHIN Accuray would relate in terms of oversight of our shared work. So, and I should say, it's sort of jointly developed with our workers and, you know, with the input and understanding of what OCHIN's structure currently is. So, to the far right, of course, OPCA's board and the committee that's just underneath that, OPCA Data Governance Committee, is this group that we are here today, and that we've described in terms of having kind of overarching governance role in guiding OPCA's data warehouse or data governance strategies. The other OPCA standing committee, I was unable to modify this as it was Rogers. I think that's confusing, but I think it's meant to imply that this sort of sits in parallel with OPCA's policy committee, strategic planning committee, that it is at a board level and part of that committee structure. So there's not another data committee, standing data committee. So I just wanted to sort of be clear about that.
So that would be part of the board vote as well, which means the bylaws will have to be changed and all that other things accepted.
So that's
Laura, this is Blaine.
Yeah,
just had a clarification question. Hey, so with the graph that you're looking at there, and I've given a little bit of input in the past around this. So even though the blue arrow, the dark blue one connecting the OCHIN Accuray governance to the left and the OPCA data governance to the right, it is pointing at the OPCA board, but what I'm envisioning here is that the data governance committee, unless I'm mistaken, would be the main point of contact, for lack of a better way to say that, and it would report out to the OPCA board. Is that what we're thinking, or are we thinking that the board actually connects to that left side?
No, thank you for asking. It's mostly the data governance committee. Okay, so that Chris is pointing. I think you can all see that. Yeah, that guy in the middle there should not be there. The OPCA OCHIN executive sponsor meetings are what I sort of alluded to earlier, at a leadership level, kind of ongoing and periodic meetings that we have had and will continue to have around OCHIN Accuray implementation. And so we're not seeking, that group does not report to the board, which is your point, I think, Blaine, nor will this committee will obviously inform our work together, but there's not a direct line between either this committee or the board.
Okay, and just a follow-up clarification is what I think what I was describing as a possibility, as I was seeing it, is that the OPCA Data Governance Committee would somehow have a touch point, though, directly with that left side in some fashion, even beyond the OPCA OCHIN executive sponsor meetings that Craig and I'm blanking all of a sudden, I apologize.
Abby.
Oh, Gil and
Abby, thank you. So is that how we're thinking of that? Is that there's still, because what I was hoping that we would do with the left and the right sides is that there would be something that the OPCA and or, in parentheses, Oregon Data Governance Committee would somehow inform the larger Accuray Governance Committee more directly than having to actually go through the Abby Craig meeting, is what I was thinking.
Okay, so let me finish, and I think that lies in this OPCA data work group, which is to the left,
okay.
The one that Gil asked about. So let me finish running through this, and then Blaine, if you think that relationship if you still have concerns and that this link isn't strong enough, we can touch on that. The OPCA data work group is that group that Gil asked about earlier and that I think you're referring to, Blaine. That is an organ-specific Accuray work group. It says OPCA, but that should really be organ-specific, and I think it's predominantly composed of I feel like we would be helping to determine who should be participating on that level. I think that it is a relatively technical work group of, I think strategic thinkers, like many of those around the table, but folks who also are going to be able to be engaged in sort of the execution strategies of the Accuray products. And so we, I think, identify and select those folks. It's my hope that there are at least a few who also sit on this data governance committee so that there is that link between this committee and that slightly more technical version. I would see that data work group as sort of having responsibility to oversee, or I should say monitor, whatever accountability plan we decide we want to bring to the Accuray work. So while this governance committee will obviously have input and influence and be sort of the first stop to think through what that accountability plan looks like, I think this data work group will be the ones to determine, are we there, are we meeting it, and to be watching it, thank you, as we go. What I think we discussed earlier this week, I referred to this meeting with Accuray or with Ocean staff on Monday, is that OPCA would in fact staff this work group. There would be Ocean staff on it, and obviously I think that needs to be a really close link with their technical people and the folks managing Accuray, but that OPCA would staff that data work group. So I think if I were redrawing this, I would have that work group a little bit closer to the OPCA Data Governance Committee. What Ocean would like to see then is that from that organ-specific data work group, that a couple of those members participate directly in this Accuray Cork work group, which some of you who are Ocean members, I think, may be more familiar than I about the role of that work group in particular. I think they help set, discuss and set sort of plans for reporting, new reports that might be developed. I don't know if they're looking at performance measures, things of the like, but.
This is Jeremy. Is there anyone on the call that's a member of that work group that can speak to its function?
There are other people in our organization who are participating in that, but I understand that's not just an Oregon-specific work group. Yeah. And that's why the recommendation was around creating this OPCA or Oregon-specific data work group. And I should also indicate that from what I understand, this is how Ocean has structured its relationship where they are the HCCNs in a couple of other states. So I know West Virginia, and I'm not sure where else, but that they've had success in having sort of a state-specific committee that they link with around Accuray use. So would that Oregon-specific work group be the one that is primarily charged with those goals or expectations around HCCN grants that is helping with the development of Accuray, because that is more Oregon-specific, right?
Yeah, although I think that their HCCN grant, we're going to transition, and Krista's going to quickly kind of run through some of those expectations.
Okay.
I do think it actually goes beyond Oregon.
Oh, it does.
But that part of that would obviously be included, I think, within what this work group would engage in. So I want to be mindful of time, but let me go back to Blaine's question. And I'm not sure if that provided clarity. And Blaine, what I want to understand is if you feel like understanding now that OPCA is staffing that data work group and that it has a direct line into the Accuray Cork work, does that meet with your concern, or would you suggest that there needs to be, that data work group or the governance committee needs to link at a higher level within OPCA Accuray?
Yeah, I guess the clarity is appreciated and helpful, but I do think it kind of goes back to my thoughts when I brought it up in a previous time, which is I still worry a little bit about the disconnect that we've experienced at that top level on the left side with the Accuray governance, and that I was hoping that the OPCA Data Governance Committee at a higher level would be able to connect more closely with that. I don't know how that looks, because there is quite a few layers to go through, even though it may not look like very many on the chart here. And I think we all agree that there have been some Accuray issues in the past. We're all hoping that they're resolved, but I continue to see some things that are concerning, and I'm worried that the data work group will focus on the strategic visioning. I think that's great, but I think there's a higher level discussion at times that they may not be tasked with, that I think the governance committee is going to be tasked with. How well is this really going? And to Diane's point, I don't want to spend a lot of energies on other potential options if this one's going well. And if it's not going as well as we'd like, how do we really go up through the process of informing AbbVie and or OCHIN of that? And I just worry about that there's not quite a close of a connection with that. And I'm not sure what you're describing, I think, is close to what I'm trying to describe as well, in the same way that there's still not a close input from that governance structure. It's an OPCA subcommittee, is I think what I'm hearing, and they would have a pretty strong voice, but OCHIN may not have in the structure on the left a way for that voice. It's a long way for that to go if there is some things that need to be discussed.
Okay, fair enough. Blaine, if I could, I'm going to ask you to sort of hold that point for when we talk a little bit more about the OPCA Data Governance Committee, and I'm going to flag this for an issue for us to follow up with. And what I'd like to consider when we get into the charter and we talk about that governance and who's on it and what its connection is to OCHIN, that we think about whether we should have how we should adjust to meet that question, because I think it's a really good point. And one of the things, for example, which we'll talk about when we get there, is that OCHIN has recommended that they participate, maybe not as a voting member or what have you, but that they are present and participate in this OPCA Data Governance Committee to sort of maximize that communication and awareness of what's going on. And so I'm not asking for an answer on this now, but that's something to consider. And that may still not get to, your point enough.
I think that would address some of that, though, so I'll wait until we discuss that at later in the day.
Okay.
Thanks.
Right. I'm going to skip through questions because we've kind of been taking them as we go, and ask Krista to briefly walk through the HCCN grant, because I think there's been a lot of confusion between Accuray and the HCCN grant, and they're not one and the same.
Yeah, so hi everyone. So just for a couple minutes, I'm going to provide a very high-level overview of the grant itself, and then also some of the core objectives of the grant, just for you guys to be aware of. So the HCCN grant, Health Center Control Network grant, was a 3-year HRSA grant, August through July to 2019, awarded to OCHIN, which OPCA co-jointly helped inform the application that they sent to HRSA as well. So it was sort of a partnership, but in terms of the finance and the awards and whatnot, OCHIN is the primary grantee. The purpose of the award is really to support health centers in a variety of different ways. So meaningful use, adopting new EHRs if they need to, HIE, quality of care, so improving UDS metrics, and also PCMH is another piece. So it's a broad range of different activities that OCHN has been tasked to support. It's the members that have signed on to participate. So in Oregon, that is all the OCHN members, 9 of the non-OCHN FQHCs. So we only have 4 health centers in Oregon that aren't participating in the HCCN grant, with 2 of those being they're participating in other state grants. So the vast majority of folks are receiving technical assistance through the HCCN grant from OCHN. With that said, so the HCCN grant focuses a lot on technical assistance, and OPCA and OCHN are both, we meet regularly to really talk about how can we coordinate a lot of this, because so much of this work is, areas both within our own domain, so how can we streamline that and really work together? And this is really just an FYI. So these are the core objectives of the grant, and you can see it's really meaningful use, HIE, quality improvement, all sorts of different things, with some certain objectives that OCHN is tasked to support health centers in meeting. So this is some of the technical assistance that health centers should be getting from OCHN, if you're participating in the grant. So non-OCHN and OCHN health centers. So this is just really an FYI. So that gets into how does Accurate play into this? So, the HCCN grant is a grant, and then Accurate is a data warehouse platform owned and developed by OCHN that is a kind of a vehicle for some of the data and the different deliverables, UDS and all sorts of other things that OCHN is making sure that they are making it robust and whatnot for all the participating members in the grant in accordance with the HCCN grant. So I realized I was a little muddled. I hope it made sense. But as part of participating in the grant, one of the things that OCHN offered to all the non-OCHN health centers was that if they participated in the HCCN grant, they would have the opportunity to have their EMR data ingested into Accurate, free of charge, essentially. So, and then the second bullet point, though, the third, is that for those that are not participating in the HCCN grant, so the other 4 health centers, they have the opportunity to have their data ingested into Accurate as well. And last I left off, I know there was some conversations about having that covered or at a low cost or something, but it was one of our very last meetings. But either way, bottom line is that Accurate is the data warehouse platform of which all Oregon health centers can have their data ingested into. And at this time, for non-Oregon health centers, that is supported by the funding through the HCCN grant, which OCHN has shared with us that they hope continues past 2019, and have a sense from their project officer that there probably will be an opportunity to do so. So that's the 2 differences between these 2 things and how they kind of play into each other. Yeah. Any questions?
Krista, this is Blaine. So just one, you mentioned the funding may or may not, the potential that it couldn't stop. Do we know what would happen with this data warehouse discussion if that funding were to stop, how that would impact that, if at all?
Well, past 2019, so, I think it's going to vary depending on if you're an OCHN health center or a non-OCHN health center is the biggest question. So for you guys being OCHN members, as far as I know, you don't pay any additional fees to have access to Accurate, correct? Anyone know that answer?
Currently.
Not currently? Okay. So, yeah, to me, it's a good question for those 9 health centers, what that might look like if funding doesn't continue past 2019, because then it becomes a question of, do they have to pay subscription charges and other pieces, which...
Doesn't it also sort of depend on where this goes? If the
right, that too.
If the data warehouse strategy develops, into a real robust thing that goes actually, that has other infrastructure beyond Accurate to support it, that may not be covered ongoing by a grant, and we have to look at a sustainability plan for that.
I think that's true, and I would just add that, so the uncertainty of it is just federally, there's a lot of uncertainty. In the absence of that, there'd be a lot more certainty. This is kind of like a base grant, as you can imagine, through HRSA for health centers that continues, or it's like an OPCA grant or an ACCN grant that is expected to continue. And so that's how the project officer is working with OCHIN, is get ready to prepare. What are you going to apply for the next round? What would it be? You know, it's like on a 3-year cycle, just like all the other grants. So the uncertainty is the federal uncertainty, the cliff, everything.
The same uncertainty we all face.
So I just wanted to be clear about that. It's not just, you know,
will it be awarded? I mean,
Yeah, it's not. It's more about it's expected. It's just the environment is so uncertain. We still haven't fixed the cliff and all those other kind of things. So hopefully you guys are still making calls back.
Yeah.
So, and obviously
Yeah,
the
thank
other
you.
thing to mention about sort of the cost, and I know those non-OCHIN clinics are aware of this, that this is related to sort of the subscription cost, for lack of another word, to participate in or to get access to a Accuray. However, there are some discrete connectivity costs for non-OCHIN clinics to come on, and I think you all are aware of that. That's been obviously an issue we've talked about in depth. So, okay, so final questions. Again, that was just hoping to sort of level again, so we're all clear as we start talking about our charter, our work moving forward, what those recommendations entailed, so we have a shared language around the HCCN grant versus Accuray, and wanted to just make sure we were on the same page about that. Any outstanding questions?
So just a little reflection on when you put up the goals, you know, the HCCN grant, you know, there were, there's a broad range of different activities and things that they're trying to get at with this HCCN grant. Not all of them, I think, have been sort of what's driving the data warehouse strategy, right? The things maybe around population health, you know, that you have in here kind of move more towards that, you know, and then thinking about, you know, it doesn't really, doesn't come out directly about total cost of care, you know, and things, you know, that we've been really focused on, you know, with this, but maybe that's in that D2 one around value and efficiency, effectiveness of health center services, but so just in terms of how we influence the direction, you know, and tying it to what our needs are, you know, as a data warehouse group of Oregon clinics may be something much more focused than a broad range of health centers in the country, or they're looking at just getting up to being on a, you know, ONC certified EHR, other things like that.
Exactly, and yeah, I think about it a lot, Gil, kind of like the overlap between our base grant goals and our strategic plan, and to the degree we can, we try to have those aligned. So we come together with the board, we talk about our strategic goals and outcomes, and those are sort of like what we've outlined for this data strategic plan, and then a portion of that overlaps with this HCCN grant and is directly related to a data warehouse. But there are other things that they are, you know, planned or that they need to execute as a part of that HCCN grant because of expectations from the feds. And so we just sort of wanted to clarify that they're not, you know, the entire HCCN grant is not execution of a data warehouse. There are additional things. And we may want to take the data warehouse, ingestion of cost data, other things that might fall outside that HCCN grant too, or go further than they have outlined. So, okay. All right.
This is William.
Yeah, go ahead, William.
I just had a question based on what you were just saying, and I wondered if it was available or not, that the current status of the HCCN grant, either measurements or progress towards goal, as a starting point for us, if you will, that it's been in place for a while, but from the perspective of this work group, we're really saying, well, what's the status of those goals? What's the status of the project at this point in time? Might be a helpful piece of information for us to have as well.
Yeah, and just to jump on in, because I'm thinking, I'm currently the point person at OPCA for the HCCN grant, and I think to that point, there are specific things that we look at on a bi-weekly basis, OPCA and OCHN, regarding the progress on the HCCN goals. Some of them are definitely related to Accuray. So, for example, OCHN wants to get all the UES reports available in Accuray, which ties to the HCCN grant goals. So maybe, for a future action item, I can sit with the folks at OCHN on the project management end and identify which ones are relevant to Accuray and bring this back to the group potentially when we start carving out the plan.
Yeah, I think that'd be great, or just ask even OCHN staff to come sort of present on the status of those goals and what have you. Good point.
I guess another question I have is, are we the only ones within the OCHN network that's participating in the HCCN grant that are, asking those questions around total cost of care and population health, in that way, or is this shared by, a broad set of the centers?
It's a great question, Gil. So as I mentioned, it's my understanding that the grant does involve beyond Oregon some other
54 health
right. So other health centers, and Planned Parenthood, for example, I think, is that part of how that's totally separate?
Yeah, that's a separate thing.
But West Virginia, and so the fact that they are sort of engaging some of these other regions, not only in the grant, but in Accuray, and looking at that tool and sort of what it's capable of, leads me to think that they probably are having those same, conversations. But I don't know, Krista, if you have more.
No,
insight.
we pretty much only talk about the Oregon progress. There's 54 participating health centers under the HCCN grant from California, West Virginia, and a couple other states. I get the sense that we're probably the one that OCHN partners with the most on this, based on feedback, but I think that's a good question. Can we all see this on the screen well?
Yeah, so let's turn to what we developed as a very drafty charter for your reaction and thought. And I think I'm going to suggest that we just take a minute for you folks to kind of review the description and for us to talk a little bit about it. I don't think it's useful to, wordsmith this statement. That's obviously an overarching aim, and want to make sure that it's reflective of what you all understand the purpose of this committee to be. And I would suggest that with the description or that sort of overarching view, that we could also take some feedback offline and come back with revisions to this. So, but take a moment to look at it, and then I think our time might be best spent then digging into goals. Okay, any thoughts on sort of major things missing or discrepancies between the way this is framed and your understanding of the committee?
Well, this is Blaine. I'll just chime in real quick, and not meant to be too quick in looking at, but I actually, mentally, when I absorb that, it feels right to me from what we've discussed in the past.
I think it's directionally correct, you know. One thing, you know, there's reference to the strategic plan that was adopted, and as if that plan is sort of set in stone forever, never to be changed. But, you know, it may be that there's some dynamic interplay between, you know, what that strategic plan is and how it evolves over time. You know,
how about if we add oversee the implementation and evolution of OPC's strategic plan? I think that's a good point. Yeah.
This is Jeremy. That makes sense to me as well. I think this paragraph emphasizes the rigorous discussions we've had around total cost of care and how we need to advocate probably for that. And so it talks about policies and political strategies. So appreciate that in the sentence.
This is Vanetta, and I don't want to make this wordy, so don't do it if you don't think it's right. But this piece around the accountability of a Curie and then strawman a Curie accountability, I think I'd like to see something like whatever it is, like is a Curie, and this is a question for the technical people out there, is it a data aggregator, is it a reporting software, or whatever it is, but I think we should do something that says our chosen data aggregator, and then put a Curie in parentheses, because that gives us room for it to change or be different, and a Curie is only as good as what its function is supposed to be.
Good point.
Like network data warehouse?
I don't think it's a data warehouse. I think it's a data aggregator and reporting tool, but I would love to have the technical people say what it is.
That's a tricky one. I mean, they both can be used in different contexts. I think of them more in the structure that they currently are as a data warehouse rather than an aggregator, because they don't have that many sources of data. Primarily it comes from Epic and in the Planned Parenthood land from all of their databases. I'm not sure what the other data sources they have are at this point.
Aggregator
I guess
is more of a function than a data warehouse.
Okay.
I guess the sentence, the accountability of network data, isn't it, in practice, is it to guide the roadmap and to advocate on behalf of the functionality of a Curie product on behalf of the members? Or is it more around the governance of the data and who can see what?
It feels like it's both. This is Vanetta. It feels like it's both of those things that you've said.
I think it's both, and I think the if I understand Vanetta's point, it's that she wants to leave room for if we either have added data tools or if you know, that it could be agnostic of the Curie if there were either other partners or a shift made.
Yeah, I get that. It makes sense. Yeah, I'm thinking as a data analytics solution, something like that.
I like that. That's closer. Yes. Sounds like winter raids. I'm sorry, Diane. You sounds like you were saying something.
I just said I think that sounds better too. I want to keep it as agnostic as possible. But also, is this committee responsible for any subcommittees that might need to be developed for, I don't know, more detail work?
So that OCHIN, now I'm forgetting the exact name of it, but that sort of subcommittee, I think we envision will sort of report, would be a subcommittee of this one, or at least would have some concurrent members and would report up to this governance committee, I believe. So, Krista, maybe just a note, and we can figure out how to state it later, but that we'll work in concert with the OCHIN
Maybe.
OPC,
I'll
Oregon,
add a little,
Data
yeah,
Security Committee, something like that.
comment language around working with
And I wouldn't put specifically OCHIN or Cure. I would avoid any of those things. I would just talk about it from a subcommittee or work group subcommittee standpoint.
Okay.
Data technical work group, something along those lines.
Okay. Which
Thank you.
now anyway is that subcommittee. Yeah, with the parentheses. Okay. Good. So again, I want to, other sort of major points, and we will obviously take this back. This is still going to be a draft when you see it next time. I think it's going to be kind of a working document, but I want to make sure it's, there aren't major pieces missing from it.
This is William. I was wondering about the word overseeing and the governance piece of this related to, you know, policies and, you know, what level of responsibility, authority resides in this committee, where that recommendation goes to relative to, say, the OPCA board. But it feels a little soft to say we oversee policies. Do we approve those policies? Do we engage in any, you know, shared planning with OCHIN or others? Do we engage in, you know, other work with health centers? So if we're just overseeing policies, the question in my mind is, where do those policies come from? And what's the decision process or the governance process attached to that?
So if I could, William, I agree with you that I think that all needs further definition. And I think that it's my thinking that that is a sort of one of the first tasks for a consultant that we work with to help us kind of think through and outline what that responsibility, decision-making authority, you know, scope of oversight looks like. So I agree that this could and should be more concrete, and I think that we need sort of some time to invest in really thinking through that, and maybe look at what some other associations or places that have done this kind of work, how they have addressed those questions and issues. What do you think about that, you and others?
Yeah, that sounds right. I'm kind of trying to think about if there is disagreement or if there are alternatives that different health centers would want to employ or prioritize differently. How do we go about doing that is kind of what's, you know, in my mind as I'm thinking about this, that I'm assuming there will be some different approaches that people would like to see, and so we should maybe anticipate that some and figure out how we're going to go about prioritizing and engaging in you know, some of the development activities.
Does that make sense? And does it make sense that it's sort of a, you know, if it's not the very first, sort of an early step in working with a consultant to help really frame out that, some of those considerations?
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I would, I guess with, if this is a committee, you know, that's really charged by the board, OPCA board, that it be kind of delegated the authority to approve, you know, the policies as they relate to the data warehouse, because otherwise, you know, it's seems duplicative, you know, of other work. Why not just have the whole PCA board go through this? Or maybe, so I think the maybe implication is that, you know, this is really the group that's going to move the direction of how this data warehouse moves forward, the strategy, the development of it, and if it does get to, well, you know, we're not satisfied with the way Acure's shaping up, let's, you know, go somewhere else.
Right, reaching that decision would be...
Reaching that decision is really kind of the work, you know, of the group, of this committee, and not that of the whole board, right? I mean...
Yeah. Okay, so more to come on that. And I think I just want to leave a flag in around that point that requires that clarification, and that we'll come back to it. So let's move on to committee goals. And I think I'm going to try to just keep us focused on these short-term goals, first quarter of 2018. And so why don't you take... we will get to, obviously, longer-term goals, but I think given our timeline today, I want to keep it focused here on what are our first orders of priority. And so take a look, and then I'll open it up for thoughts and feedback.
This first quarter of 2018 is what we're talking about.
Yeah, which is moving along. Yeah, moving along. I think it's aggressive. So I think arguably that timeline is too aggressive, but I'm looking for, I guess, your thoughts and feedback on that. And because this really, you know, as staff, I think, you know, we can walk away and gather information and maybe put some drafts of things in front of you, but it obviously requires your input and engagement to accomplish these things. So.
And similarly, I'd be curious if when we get to a list, like the order for some of these things.
Yes.
If you guys have particular feedback on that.
So thoughts on the phone. Let's just open it up.
This is Vanetta. I think these are the right goals. I do believe it may be a little truncated, but I don't think that if we don't try for something big, I'd rather us kind of shoot high and miss the mark, but kind of be moving it along, because I do think it has a sense of urgency. What I can't tell, and I was trying to find it on my email, with the committee charter, do we have anything in the committee charter that talks about how we're going to decide? You know, consensus, majority rules, that kind of thing. I think it would be good to get ahead of it, because I could see so many points where we'll be in disagreement and we might get stuck there.
Yeah, I think that would fall into what we were just discussing, but it may be that we should, you know, even before we go through in detail all of those decisions, that we have some agreement as to how we're going to proceed for even this first list of, you know, things in front of us.
I think in your first...
I think you need progressive too. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, I'm sorry. I was just going to say, I think it... Go ahead.
After you.
In the first, I'm so sorry. So in the first paragraph under committee description, did it talk about by consensus? I saw that somewhere.
Yeah, I saw that at the top as well.
That's referring to how we reached agreement around the strategic plan, and we could just agree that that's how we will operate unless or until we outline a more nuanced decision-making process. But I think that's referring specifically to how we adopted the plan.
Mm-hmm.
And then this is Vanetta. I don't think it needs to be overcomplicated. I think that we can, by consensus is always nice when you can get there fast enough. And then we should just maybe have a fallback position around majority rule or something like that. But our preferred decision making would be consensus because we want to try to meet everybody's needs.
Mm-hmm.
But when we get to that, we can talk about it more. I just think we should detail it. That's my main point for right now.
Okay, so for now, I'm going to suggest that we add in as a goal in the short term, and maybe we take it up in our next meeting to discuss sort of a working agreement around decision-making process, and we can at least start from your suggestion, Vanetta, about, aiming for consensus and with some kind of fallback with majority.
I like that too.
I'll debate that right now, but let's take that up next time, I guess is my point.
So Laura, this is Jeremy. I have a quick question. So one thing that's not clear to me, when we went through with Roger, we spent a lot of time talking about the strategic relevance of the data warehouse. Mm-hmm. And total cost of ownership and other things came to light. And so when we look at the committee goals, I'm a little bit unclear about when is that we really, I guess, galvanize around what the strategic importance of this is, and then what specifically are we striving to accomplish, and does it come after kind of the short list? Mm-hmm. But it seems that there's, and I think it happens at the governance committee and not at the work group, but I'm a little bit unclear on that, or there's probably conversations back and forth. But is there a strategic planning session, or have we already really done that work with Roger and we just need to kind of galvanize it, and then we bake that into the work that we do with like the Accuray accountability and some of these other tasks?
Yeah, I think that's a great point, Jeremy, and I would envision, I do feel like that with Roger, those more strategic level goals would be our longer term goals, so what comes after, and that it would, in terms of timeline, would certainly go beyond 2018, but that we have at least a starting point for that, and it may be that we need to sort of refresh or add, more detail to them when we take a look at them. But I do think those would go here, and that the long-term goals that we've yet to fill in would be of that more strategic significance.
Yeah, there may be things in the strategic plan that we adopted that lend themselves to being, our goals, mm-hmm. For some more specific things,
right.
Because this is more of a framework mm-hmm. for how are we going to, kind of move this work along, but what's the end product
right.
that we're really
mm-hmm.
looking to get at? This, mm-hmm. It's hard to tell from these goals. Mm-hmm. Are we looking to have total cost of care data available for us by third quarter? Mm-hmm. Are we looking to having engaged with all payers, all claims, database mm-hmm. For the state, mm-hmm. for access to that? Mm-hmm. Sort of getting to more of the specifics around what is it that we are really wanting to accomplish mm-hmm. with this, mm-hmm. Other than
setting up the committee.
Setting up the committee
right.
and discussing,
Yep. Mm-hmm. So I agree completely, and maybe what I can suggest is that we, in our next meeting, we come back to that, and we'll start from the standpoint of what has been included in that strategic plan, see how we need to adjust and add to that. Mm-hmm. As I've said before, when we're sort of thinking internally about how to kick this off and get us going, it's a bit of a chicken and an egg thing in that, you know, in order to decide who should be making decisions about what those long-term goals are, we have to decide who is the committee and how we're going to work together in those things. So, and, you know, we probably could have approached it in reverse as well.
Well, no, I mean, I think this is fine for first quarter's, you know, work of the committee, but, you know, it seems we should fairly quickly get into defining more specifically what we want to see as the outcomes, you know, the products, you know, of this work, so that we have something very clear to target and also to advocate for, because you know, if it's things that we have to persuade or you know, OCHIN to put more attention in the development of a Curay around a particular thing, then we need to know what that is that we're, you know, shooting for.
Agreed. Okay, so let me suggest that, and I think this would have, to me, been implicit, but let's call it out, under review and approve the committee charter, including further defining long-term goals, so that we are having that conversation in the first quarter. Yeah. But the goals aren't achievable in the first quarter. Does that make sense? Yeah. But we define them and we have that conversation sooner than later. Okay. Okay, so I want to get to also thinking a little bit about committee membership. I'm being mindful of our time, but let me add, if we could stay on that just a minute, Krista, though. Any last thing sort of missing? Like I said, I think it's a lot, or things that are less of a priority that we think could come off and wait for later. I'm going to not advocate for a particular thing, but I'm going to request that, especially if you add anything, that you think about that.
I would just say with number 6, prioritize and begin alternative product demonstrations. Shouldn't we be developing a list in the first quarter at least of what those products are, or is there one already?
Yeah, we've been working. Sorry, Troy.
Yeah, so we have an ongoing list, and actually, at the second part of the hour, we'll kind of go over where that list is and hear from you guys as well as that you'd like to hear from.
Okay.
The only thing I was going to is connecting back to Gil's comment. It's not just about, I think what you're getting at is what's the outcomes, what do we want to accomplish, but in the middle of that is the functionality you guys worked on over the summer, and I think that probably needs to go in there. Like, are we getting the functionality out of the data warehouse? Because the data warehouse is a thing that you can use strategically or not. Like, you can have a data warehouse and you don't accomplish your goals if you don't do the back end. I think you're talking about the back end goals, like the short and long term. What are we trying to accomplish with this? But in between there is are we getting the data warehouse functionality, which is the role of the group, and making sure we're tracking, you know, and prioritizing what functionality we want by when. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think, and it kind of leads to some of that overall arching goals around being a learning community around. So you've got this data, now what? What are you actually going to use it for to improve the cost, quality, care experience of your patients? Yeah. And so I think that's the, you know, those kinds of things deserve goals and objectives on their own. But I recognize we can't find everything in the first quarter. Right away. Okay, good point.
This is William. I have one item that might be added is how do we define or engage the health center membership that's part of the data warehouse activities, communications or sharing information or just what's the engagement process for them? Seems like that would be something for us to be talking about. So we're sharing information, we're providing, guidance about where we are and seeking input from others about, what they think about that process. Seems like something we ought to be spending some time on now.
Mm-hmm. Great addition. Okay, so little time check here. We have 40 minutes and still a fair amount to discuss, and we may not get to quite all of it, but let me walk through kind of what we were hoping to accomplish and maybe we can prioritize. So I did want to have a conversation about committee structure and membership, including this question of OCHIN and what their role and engagement should be in this committee, and then how we might, and we may defer this conversation to the next meeting, but how we should go about populating as well that subcommittee that's going to really work directly with OCHIN and Accuray for organ-specific clinics. Mm-hmm. So I'd like to have a conversation about that. And then we wanted to walk through, as we said, we have by no means a full accountability plan, but we started to outline sort of key components of accountability for OCHIN and Accuray that we think should be included in that accountability plan. So as an example, customer service issues, data validity issues, things of those natures. So we kind of wanted to get your feedback so that we can come back to you with something of a straw man, and OCHIN also put out sort of some ideas for what that might look like. And then lastly, from Troy, that sort of quick overview of where we are with the demonstration list and next steps, and similarly with the consultant. So that's what we're trying to get through. So I'm going to try to keep us moving along in those. Let's go to committee membership. And so here we have mostly people who have been involved to date within our process. I think what I think is really helpful is that we've had a nice mix of some more technical folks, quality IT folks, executive leaders, which I think is all really of value. But your thoughts maybe more categorically on who should be at the table for this conversation, and what I could see maybe outlined in this charter is that at a minimum, we will have at least a few OCHIN, non-OCHIN members. We will have, a balance between executive leaders and technical folks. So some thoughts around that, and I think maybe we've started a list like that.
I also wonder if we want to think about large and small, or rural and urban health centers.
Yeah. Thoughts on how we should start to organize that?
I like the balance that you proposed, in the composition of the work group or the committee. I think unless it got too large, trying to make it open, for broad participation, but once people have committed to it, to have, a set group, so that we don't have to continually revisit, and start afresh with a decision that's been made or something. Yeah, and then because I'm going to have to be stepping out,
right.
I think as far as OCHIN staff, I see a value of OCHIN staff participating. I don't know if they should be like a formal, members, just because if part of what this committee is charged with doing is exploring other options.
Right.
You know, that could be could directly
Be an odd vote.
be awkward or
Mm-hmm.
you know, have some conflicts there.
Mm-hmm.
But I would encourage regular participation because I think as that governance committee is working through the development of the data warehouse, that, you know, OCHIN has an interest, you know, of you know, meeting the needs of the customers in this endpoint is, you know, the members of this committee.
Good.
I would totally agree. I think as invited, I think there is benefit in having OCHIN members there, and you want to have the opportunity to speak freely as well when things aren't going so well.
Mm-hmm.
There may be times where you want to have a conversation with them in the room, but then outside of that, as you're setting direction and strategy other than with OCHIN, yeah, you want that opportunity. So I'm in agreement with that.
Okay. Other thoughts about that?
This is William. I just have a question. Are we talking about the Data Warehouse Governance Committee only here, or are we talking about the work group as well, or both?
No, I think we're talking about the governance committee here now, and the work group committee will take separately. I think we may not get there until next time, but I think certainly OCHIN will be involved in that work group committee, because I think that's going to be far more sort of technical and sort of feedback, and we don't want to have any barriers to clear communication there. So I think right now we're just talking about this governance committee.
I think it makes sense what people are saying. One of the things I wonder about in the future would be setting it up for, do we have staggered terms? Do we bring in different individuals from the different peer networks? Because as we evolve, we want to have more engagement from, you know, different places within the network as well. It seems like that might be something in terms of, as we're thinking about who and how do we put them on the committee, how does the committee evolve in terms of its membership over time, might be something that initially for us, it feels like we are a kind of a startup committee, right? We're able to kind of work through a number of the issues to get it going. I don't know what it looks like, say, a year from now or 2 years from now, but it seems to me the more we engage different people within the health centers, the stronger it's going to be over time.
Great. Any other comments generally around that committee membership? And I'm hearing a relative consensus around including OCHIN on sort of an as invited basis, and maybe we sort of generally look to include them, but take a look at the agenda before, and if there are things either that we would say, please attend the second hour of the meeting, or, you know, I probably need to think a little bit more about the easiest way to facilitate that, but I'm hearing a bias to have them at the table while being mindful of creating space for more private conversations.
I can support that.
Okay.
This is Blaine. I can too. I think I'd like to see us not presume that they're there every time unless there's a specific business need for the committee for them to be there, and there may be every time, but sometimes there may not be.
Okay, so maybe the reverse of what I said, which is we look at the agenda and invite them if it feels comfortable. Generally, not always included. Maybe until maybe I would articulate this until we sort of get our norms and the charter filled out and those kinds of things. That we wouldn't talk about routine participation, but okay.
Yeah, this is Michael. I agree with what Blaine said. He brought up the business need for it, and that really brings out the point that it's a vendor relationship.
Yep.
Mhm.
Okay. So in order to move us along, here's what I'm going to suggest. I heard some different categories of, wanting to have pretty broad and balanced participation, large, small, rural, urban, technical, executive folks, quality folks, OCHA, non-OCHA. So I'm going to suggest that we kind of come up with what those criteria are, and that next time, or maybe I think actually we can even do this in between, that I could share who's currently on our roster who fits those criteria, and we can think about if we need to kind of recruit to fill some of those holes, and that we would say that's sort of our working committee for now, and we consider it static for the time being. But I also heard some suggestion, and I would suggest maybe included in this broader kind of the longer term governance conversation. Do we want some other considerations, like what are the staggered terms involving folks from our peer networks and stuff like that? And I guess I would suggest we put that on the list for kind of the longer term plan for committee composition. Does that work?
Makes sense.
Yeah, that works for me. I think the one piece on that, Laura, is I firmly believe that engaging the health center staff by rotating different people through the committee is also a learning opportunity for them and for each health center that I think strengthens the network and strengthens our collective ability to do things. So that's part of the reason why I think that rotation makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Good idea. Okay.
Well, I would agree. I would sort of, in that you lose some continuity. You don't want the strategy to change because there's a new member shift. And I think you're putting a lot of pressure in the end on OPCA to keep, you're constantly reviewing where we are with new members.
So I think maybe, if I might, William, suggest that you probably meant when we can, not rotating frequently, but that when we talk about potentially staggered terms, let's say after a year, that it's, a third of the folks move on or off, that to consider that at that time an opportunity for people who, might bring something new to the table, or who would be in a good position to learn and engage on this level.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking of. If we had 15 members and 5 rotated every year, that would be a 3-year term, for example, would I think address that continuity question, and then also getting new people into the process. So whatever makes sense in that regard, I'm open to that.
Okay. Let's move on to, you want to go back to the PowerPoint, and I think we'll make some adjustments to this charter based on what we've talked about. As I said, I think it's going to be a working document, and next time, we talked about coming back, filling in some of those, maybe starting to look at the longer term goals a little bit, and some other things. But let's go to, as I described it, kind of the categories of the accountability. I think that's next. Okay. So I think Krista was going to talk to us about that.
It's
okay. Oh, don't. We're having no.
All right, come on, computer.
This is our plan.
You're really.
First, we need to upgrade laptops at OPCA so we can have a webinar that's at
Oh, can you guys see anything on your screen?
Yes.
Yes.
Oh.
What
Yeah, the PowerPoint.
What, do you guys see like a slide?
Yeah.
Yeah, I see the slide 14. It's not, it's the, you know, it's not up as the presentation, but I can see the slide.
Okay, I guess it is that thing, so maybe we'll just follow around my laptop.
Yeah.
Okay, we're troubleshooting some difficulties. Okay, there. Okay, accountability plan. Okay, that's what you guys will see. Perfect. Let's see, what is this about? So, I thought I would just talk a little bit about some of the proposals from the final report that Roger put together. That was a little bit of an overview, and he met with the OCHIN folks, correct, to talk about what an accountability plan might look like, and just some systems they kind of already have in place. You know, so next couple minutes, just reviewing what that was in the final report, and then talking a little bit about performance measurement goals. The proposed format was that the accountability plan, that the group would track the progress of the goals in regards to specific requests related to Accuray via dashboard, which I'll show in the next slide as an example. And in terms of roles, the Data Warehouse Governance Committee will review the dashboard regularly, while the work groups that we were talking about previously will be the ones that really look more at the technical aspects of the status of each of those deliverables within the accountability plan. So for example, you know, OCHIN has a process where clinics might submit JIRAs, you know, scope of work is another example. You know, this group would be responsible, the data work group would be responsible for monitoring those pieces, maybe looking at reports around usage of Accuray by OPCM members, kind of that technical stuff, and then I think inform the governance committee as well on OCHIN's status in regards to meeting all these different deliverables. So that's kind of the proposed format for the accountability plan. And then on this slide is just a screenshot of what that dashboard could look like. Again, this is from that final report. I'm going to pause and see if there's any questions before we talk about the performance measures piece. Okay. So any thoughts on, as a general process, like identifying the goals, which would be this committee, OCHIN, and then outlining it in a
so not reaction to specifically what's on here, but that we would be working towards creating a thing like this.
So this, William, I just had a question about what happens if the accountability is not being met. Is there contemplating a process around communicating that, or setting, you know, timelines or something along those lines? What were you thinking in that regard?
Yeah, we've talked about that internally, and definitely I would see the consultants being involved in that as well, or we've talked about that piece.
I think yes.
Yeah.
I think the answer is yes. We would want to. I think we would want to think really carefully about what would our approach be, and it might depend on which outcomes they were. If it, you know, let's say it's, I'm pretending that we decide there's something around response time to customer service requests, and we decide we'd like them to hit a target of, I don't know what, in a week. I'm making this up. I have no idea if this is realistic. And generally, the response time's at 2 weeks. So I think we'd want to have a conversation if this is, you know, you know, we say we'd like to be getting this kind of report, I don't know what, monthly, quarterly, and if in June it's not being met, is this an indicator that we would say, you know, we pull the plug if that's the case, or we expect you know, improvement to, you know, by 3 days in the next quarter or something like that. I think we would have to be having that conversation as we establish the expectations. And I think what Krista suggested is that I think if we're recommending that we have a consultant help us sort of create this, that's one of the expectations for some outside assistance, and that we would tackle that as we develop the accountability plan.
It would seem like the bigger things you guys would want to be holding OCHIN accountable for is reports. Like if they don't have a report up and running by a certain time, and that's getting in the way of you interacting with the federal government or with the state or whatever, then I think that's where the help also from the outside saying, well, there was a understandable glitch, or actually this isn't understandable and you guys really need to press hard on this to get this resolved. So I think that's where you're really the accountability plan may have some of those process things, but I think the big ones are, have they accomplished this big thing you need in order to do your work? So.
And then the quality of the work.
That's true.
Yeah.
How many times do you have to go back? Because there were problems with it or whatever. So quality of work, I think, is a key piece to it as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. So some of this also really ties into the idea of identifying some very specific performance goals. So the dashboard is really used as a tool to really track the progress on key deliverables that will relate to key performance goals to be identified by this committee. On the screen, you can see some performance goals that were listed in the final report. These were just some general ideas. So milestone dates achieved on time, user feedback, quality assurance performance audits, ticket backlog and response time, system usage metrics, and system availability were some. But, with that said, we wanted to spend some time, I'm trying to remember how much, just a couple minutes.
5 minutes.
5 minutes or so. And I'll flip back to the previous slide, but just, what category should we be considering in terms of performance? We're curious to hear from all of you. Just what your thoughts are of that initial list I just showed you, and if there's anything you'd add, change, or remove. If you want, I can go ahead and go on back to this. So there's the list. What are your guys' initial impressions on these performance goals that were in the final report?
So I presume that those milestones would include a subset of, say, report development as an example.
I read this.
Is that how you'd see that?
I read this as here are our different goals and objectives we've outlined for this timeline. What percentage of them have we hit the mark on?
I see. Are we at 75% or 25%? Okay.
I think the one that, this is Jeremy, I think getting the UDS measures into Curia is going to be a huge undertaking. And so I would worry about presenting our numbers out of there that they are right. And so the reconciliation on all these are going to make or break the product. And so that's somewhat in QA performance audits, I guess. But I think it's the ongoing accuracy of the data, right, and the reconciliation of the data that's the key to making this whole thing work.
For sure. Okay.
I totally agree.
Yeah, this is Michael. I totally agree also. It's a data validation step that we actually need to identify.
And on that, I'm just curious, are there both, would we have both process recommendations? I don't know, again, this is outside of my scope, but are there things that we'd like to see them do that they're not currently doing with respect to validation that we'd outline in addition to, no more than I don't know how you would define data validation, but a 1% difference. I don't know how that works. And, in report variation or something like that. Is there both a process and an outcome related to that?
So I don't use
Yeah,
the
look-
Curie. I don't have a lot of insight into that, but on the data warehouse that we develop internally, right, as we roll out new functionalities and train folks on it, we've reconciled the data with their existing reports, and it goes through a pretty rigorous QA process. But I'm curious, folks on the phone, are there kind of, how does Ochin do this? How does it work with its partners to validate the data?
Yeah, at Mosaic, we work with them a little bit, but we do depend heavily on our in-house reporting, and we validate it internally before going to a Curie. So if we're going to be using a Curie here, we would need that that validation step with our own report. So it would be a verification with what we're already running.
Mm-hmm. Well, and my understanding too is from reading the final report that you know, in regards to any concerns with a Curie, that clinics would submit probably a JIRA request, just outlining like what specific reports they're maybe having problems with and whatnot, which JIRA is essentially the ticketing system that Ochin uses to track a lot of different requests. And just thinking about this, you know, there's that avenue, and I'm thinking about this data work group. Probably we need some members that are really the people that run the reports, because it will be hard to differentiate and figure out, you know, how these reports are getting fixed if we use that JIRA ticketing system, which is what they suggested via the final report, without having the people that are actually submitting the JIRAs, like, involved in this process. So that's just one thing there that we probably need to not have it be this, let's look at the number of tickets regarding around, you know, problems with the Curie, but it's more what's coming from maybe this specific work group. Has it been resolved versus the entire universe? So that's one thought.
Yeah, I think that's addressed, I think, in the ticket backlog and response time somewhat. My mind goes to more 90% customer satisfaction on data validity.
Yeah, and another thing I was going to add, so we have a joint position in-house, care transformation specialist, that is an Ochin employee, and one of her primary roles is to do user acceptance testing, which is specifically around the data within a Curie and is it accurate. So, you know, that's one point I want to put out there too, is that there is this position in-house that we have that has not been determined of her involvement in this process, but her role is to do testing on reports. So,
okay, so that's helpful. I'm hearing it feels like we need obviously a high level, high emphasis on accuracy of data. I'm hearing so both in that we could frame that in terms of satisfaction with that validity. Maybe also I wouldn't substitute it, but also some kind of process, you know, just that even there's a process that clinics feel satisfied with in terms of going through that validation. What else do you either not see here, or do you want to pull out and really highlight here?
This is William. I have a question about scope, and I'm curious about how much of this is duplicated potentially with what's going on in individual sites. And I'm using the UDS as as an example here, where are we intending collectively to move towards a Curie as the UDS reporting tool, or and I was thinking differently than that, or were we looking at the scope really being getting that information and that data that we can't get within our own systems vis-a-vis the total cost of care and all payer, all claims data, or information that is more on a statewide basis versus our own? And so I'm asking that question in the context of, should we be scoping this in terms of the work we're doing before we're looking at what specifically performance goals are that we would want to identify?
That's a great question.
Yeah, and That is a good one because, you know, the data warehouse can serve so many different purposes. I mean, for APCM example, you know, creating the reports for that, the hope is eventually that you guys don't have to send spreadsheets to us any longer, that we all have a mutual database that we can just pull data from. You know, that said, I mean, I would see like prioritizing, figuring out, is it total cost of care we want to work on first? Is it, you know, the UDS? And if so, what are the resources and all sorts of different things? So I think
well, it
that's
seems you want more than just, like, because the total cost of care would be a piece of data that you want to fit into other pieces of data within the data warehouse to start segmenting population and getting at those, you know, those outcome type goals that Gil was talking about earlier. So I don't think you'd want to sit there. I also get a little nervous about putting total cost of care up front because, I mean, just the political issues of getting it and all that kind of stuff, and before the functionality starts, we don't want to take the foot off the pedal on that, but we want some accountability that's more real time, that can show that it can actually work, and then add that total cost of care as quickly as we can to see if that works and that the customer satisfaction is good on that. But if you just have one piece of data, and I don't think that's what you're suggesting, William, then you can't do that segmenting and all that interesting work that comes along with the data warehouse.
Yeah, I was just using like UDS as an example, but for me, maybe there's a survey or something, because I don't see us really necessarily wanting to move towards a Accuray for UDS reporting. Maybe, but we have that capability, or we have. My guess is health centers have developed that capability and do it right now, whether they use the current system or not. And so my question is, well, if more than half of us are using it, or 3/4 of us are using it, and we want to improve it, that's different than if, you know, 1/3 of us are using it and the rest of us have no intent of using it. So that's kind of the question I'm asking, is do we really know what scope we're talking about here relative to this? Because I was thinking it was statewide types of population or best practices or data to benchmark against was really kind of our focus. And in addition to that, then how would we use some of that for our local activities as well? But I don't know which is more important, or which is, you know, which is the ones we should be focusing on first.
Well, and then also just to a point, since Accuray is across states, so it's not just Oregon, you know, and that's where the other whatever it's called, the cork comes in. So, you know, example, Ocean is currently building out UDS reports in Accuray, so that's part of their strategic decision they've made. So that work is moving forward. That said, that also takes resources and all sorts of other things. So I see this as being perfect timing for us to come together as a group and say what we want. But, you know, just also, I think what it raises is we need to find a way to stay abreast of what's happening in the cork, I guess, is where those conversations have, and what Ocean is planning to do with Accuray, get clear on that and try to inform it instead of just us only coming up with our own priorities and trying to fit that into something they're already doing. So,
okay, so we are getting close on time, and I want to move on and make sure that we have just a few minutes to touch base on the demonstration, next steps, and a consultant. But I feel like I'm hearing we need quite a bit more conversation around some of these components, and I think while, you know, I think you have some really good feedback today about prioritizing accuracy of data and things of that nature, it may be that we want to consider, you know, William suggested a survey, or whether it's that or another way to sort of gather input about what should be our priorities in terms of seeking, you know, reports, or kind of what we want Ocean to execute on first. That we need to put a little more thinking and work into how we would prioritize that. That's what I feel like I'm hearing. So I'm going to suggest that we sort of take that away, and when we talk about coming next time with a straw man, either if we can think of some pre-work we can do to that end, we do that, or we come with a suggestion of how we approach that question, if that works for folks. All right, Troy.
Yeah, hi everyone. So currently I'm working on putting together a revolving door of data warehouse vendors who will come and pitch to this group. So the goal is to hopefully kind of get our brains thinking about what future success of a product looks like, and kind of gets at the question of, we have the data, now what do we do with it? So I think it'll be helpful for the group to see some of these finalized displays around not only quality, but also any displays around total cost of care, and how other people are opting to use it from product to product. So right now I kind of have just a rough running list of data warehouse vendors in my head, and I kind of wanted to get some feedback from the group, whether you knew of any others that I should be contacting or reaching out to. So my list of now includes Azara, Arcadia, Health Catalyst, and Eye2Eye Solutions. So those four. And we plan to have Accuray step in and do a product demo for the first half of this data government meeting in February, just to help establish a baseline where we are with the product before we see others. So any feedback to that list or ideas for others to reach out to?
I think
this is Jeremy. I could have.
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
I'd say I think I like that list, but I'd also think Healthy Planet, Epic's Healthy Planet should be added.
And then if I remember correctly, Roger referenced the Cadillac of all these products and said even though we probably couldn't afford it, we should look at it. I can't remember if that was an SAP product or what that vendor was. Maybe it's in our notes, but I didn't see it on the list.
Yeah, I'll look back at it. I can't remember either,
Yeah,
Jeremy. Good point.
either.
It's right down the
Yeah.
Cadillac. We could ask Roger.
Cadillac data warehouse. And so currently we envision these meetings being their own stand-up hourly meeting. We are thinking right now that they're going to be bi-monthly, unless the group wants to move a little faster, then we can move it up to monthly. But any feedback on the timing of these meetings?
Keeping in mind, I think right now we're proposing that we're meeting monthly at least for a while we stand up this committee and get things rolling, and that we're going to seek, a few folks that likely overlap with people who want to hear a demo to do this the work group that feeds to Ocean. So just keep that in mind, and so that's why we kind of thought about every other month, because it feels like we're asking a lot of your time as well. So thoughts and reactions to that.
This William, that sounds good to me. It seems like over a 5 or 6 month period of time, things are going to change. And so I'm just wondering how things look in June or July versus how they look today in terms of some of that process. But I think the timing makes sense.
Okay.
Anyone else? I think that I would say, I think that was part of our thinking as well with starting with Accuray, sort of, as we call it, kind of the Accuray reshoot. So, and it also was a request of theirs that because we've sort of been on pause, or many clinics anyway, kind of been on pause with them, or haven't really seen where they are since we started this process. They wanted to kind of come in and sort of revisit and update us on where they are. And then I think that also allows us, to your point, William, to be a little bit further along in our thinking and defining what we're looking for and our goals, and I think allows us to kind of shape those meetings with a little bit more clarity in terms of what questions we have and all of that. So, okay, I'm not having any dispute
this
about
is Diane.
Getting close. Go ahead, Diane.
I'm really sorry. I also think having them fairly close together would certainly help in a comparison so that you're not forgetting. So even if you take, I'm not necessarily proposing this, but I'm just saying, even if you take a week and say, we've got a room scheduled here, you're in Portland, right? So wherever you're located, we've got a room, and we're going to bring in for a week 2 vendors at a time, and let us see their products. I think might be better served. So you're able to do your actual comparison and ease of use, those kinds of things.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting. Okay. Let's take that into consideration, and we'll come back with that. That's interesting feedback, Diane. We obviously hadn't considered it. Okay. No, I'm still doing that one. Okay, so we're at time, but you can see on the screen there some of the items that I was considering for sort of first priorities for this consultant. And I think in particular, those questions we started to talk about around governance structure and decision making. So those, you know, I think we've had a conversation about how to operate until we formalize things a bit more, but having somebody help us work through what should that decision-making process be? What is the purview of this committee to make decisions, and how does that relate to the board? Things of that nature. So that's one, I think would also include that committee membership and how we rotate and those kinds of things. Secondly, I think because of the urgency I think we all feel around this accountability plan, I think bringing someone on to help us really continue to advance that and, put more meat to the bones of what we started to discuss today, as well as thinking through the questions of, and what if we're not meeting, what if those expectations aren't being met, how we address that. And then, of course, continuing to hone in on the committee's charter and one-year plan, and kind of continuing to advance that longer-term vision for the committee. Mm-hmm. So any sort of quick thoughts in response to this, and I think what I'll do, and I'll follow up with you in terms of a follow-up email, is see if you folks have any recommendations of folks we should be talking to. I'd be really happy to hear that. I have a couple of folks that have been recommended to OPCA, and I can share that in that email with some people that I intend to reach out to. I'll just say, but am certainly open to revisiting or rethinking this, but I think we feel like with sort of the frequency with which we envision meeting and the content of this, that we would prefer somebody to be local. So obviously we felt like Roger was so helpful, and he certainly offered to continue to weigh in and help provide advice and guidance. But I feel like for these really concrete products, that it would be helpful to have someone in town. So my thinking right now is that Roger probably wouldn't be assisting in this regard. But that we could still access and bring him in if we were sort of stuck or had higher level strategic questions. So I don't know if folks have recommendations, thoughts about that, or if not, I guess I'll look forward to more specific input you might have about either that consulting scope of work and suggested consultants via email. Any thoughts? You're all turning into pumpkins, or you've left? They will. Okay.
Well, this is William. I'm not a pumpkin yet. I'm getting there.
All right. Okay. Time to wrap up.
One comment I would make is I agree with the local. I wonder about budget, and maybe that's for next time to think about. How are we funding this? What are the structures to do that? Maybe begin thinking about that might be something to add to the agenda as well.
So William, I think we touched on that at the outset. I believe that funding for that consultant, at least sort of getting started with someone, was included in that original recommendation that will go to the board next week. around sort of startup costs for this project. So I neglected to include that today. It was just an oversight. When we do our follow-up email, I will send that out, and you can see what's going to go to the board. And I don't know that we still may need to revisit it if we feel like it's just a starting point. We need to think about long-term support, but I think part of that anyway is covered.
Mm-hmm.
Great, thank you.
Okay. Thanks, folks, so much for hanging in there with us. That was a lot to cover, and so we'll be in touch shortly with follow-up items, and look forward to talking again in February.
Thanks for organizing. I'll talk to you soon.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you.
Talk to you all soon.